Hey, how you doing? I hope everybody out there is well. And I was wondering what I could talk about next, and I recalled that a few weeks ago somebody asked me what I thought were the four greatest problems facing the world slash the United States today. So, kind of off the top of my head, I mentioned these four issues that I'm going to talk a little bit more about. And as I've thought about it since the interview, the discussion, and the more I think about it, the more I like the statement. That really was a spontaneous one at the time. So I'm going to talk about them here today and explain them a little bit. So the first issue that I think is a real existential problem for the world today is the declining population that we will probably confront worldwide, planet-wide, by the end of the 21st century. Industrial societies go through a demographic transition, and eventually they end up in this place called a post-industrial demographic dynamic, where you have declining birth rates and declining death rates. So you get an older population with fewer people able to work and contribute to economic activity. And that's already happening, happening in an extreme degree in Japan, that has, I think, suffered annual declines in population for the last 14 years. I think their overall population declined by about 800,000 last year. I think a little bit more than that. The total population in Japan is about 112 million, I think. It might be 120 million, but it's, let's say, 110 million. And if you think about 800,000 out of 110 million, that's about 7%. So suffering... No, sorry, not 7%, 0.7%, so just under 1. And it continues to accelerate. So it doesn't take too much time for this continued decline in overall population to fundamentally affect the survival of Japanese society. And in fact, the Prime Minister earlier this year, when he announced some significant measures to encourage people to have more children, made that point, that this was an issue that, if not turned around, was going to destroy Japanese society as they knew it. And it's affecting the U.S. as well. The U.S., we have a closer to replacement birth rate, which is, I think, 2.1 per couple, I guess, is the measurement. But even so, our population is getting older, and the percentage of our population that is in the working age has begun to absolutely decline. I think it reached a peak of, 67% a few years ago. But maybe in 2021, it was 65% of the population, which was between the ages of 15 and 64. And these numbers would be much worse if it were not for all the immigrants that the U.S. continues to accept, unlike Japan. I think last year something like 18% of the individuals in the U.S. labor force were foreign born. So why do I think declining population is such a bad issue? After all, and I'm going to talk about this next, our planet is under a lot of pressure, and wouldn't it be better to have fewer people? Yes, I think you could make that argument, but while you're getting to fewer people on the planet, you're going to have to deal with a lot of disruption of your economy, and I believe also your political systems. All the ways that we think about the economy are based on growth. We assume GDP the GDP should grow every year. And when it doesn't, we get all exercised, and it's a depression and a recession, and it, causes political leaders the next election. What will happen 15, 20, 25 years ago, 25 years from now, when these declining birth rates or stable birth rates and declining working age population makes it very difficult to grow your economy. How will political leaders be able to increase prosperity, provide a welfare safety net, preserve Social Security with a declining population, particularly in the working age? I think those are all going to be significant issues. I think we underestimate how much of our sort of social and political assumptions are based on continuing growth. And I think it's going to be a rather dramatic few decades leading up to it. You know, what will happen to the stock market, for example? China is going to suffer this in a particularly hard way because of the draconian one child per family policy that they sort of stupidly implemented in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. Actually, I don't think they reversed this until about 10 years ago. It's going to be very difficult for them to sustain the size of the economy they have now in about 20 years. So stay tuned. Declining population, that's the first one I mentioned. The second one I mentioned, and to be cute, I'll call it a decline. Well, there's nothing cute about this, but I'll call it a declining planet. I could speak in terms of climate change, but I think that there's just an overall issue of planetary resources being strained because of our industrial economy and the 8 billion plus people who live on the planet. This is the good side of population decline, that perhaps in 150 years the planet will reach a much better balance between humans and the resources and the other species on the planet. But right now we're in I think a parlous state, and particularly because we don't know what problems we're causing or we have caused. So for example, insect populations have declined dramatically anywhere you have modern agriculture. What exactly are the unintended consequences of that? I don't think we know. We know one, I believe, which is that bird populations in many countries are declining as well. I've got some friends who live in Canada part of the year, and they tell me that there's a lot more biodiversity, insects and birds, that they just noticed personally in Canada, because Canada banned the use of pesticides such as Roundup years ago. And yet, they tell me that one of the things they smuggle into Canada when they go up there for the summer is Roundup. So, you know, what are they thinking? Not coherently, I fear. So anyway, there's just a whole lot of aspects to this pressure on the planet. I don't, changing weather patterns, changing temperatures in the ocean, changing, winds, a potential collapse of the Gulf Stream, all of these things talk about having to figure out a complex system and model a complex system. I think this is all beyond our capabilities right now. And so I see this as a very difficult problem, and particularly difficult because I don't believe there are any obvious interventions. I know that we're thinking of some, that obviously we want to reduce fossil fuel consumption. But I do worry that in a system as complex as a planetary one, policy choices that we make may have unintended consequences in the same way that policy choices we made 50 years ago had unintended and bad consequences. So anyway, that's the second one, declining population. The third one, now here I can say to be cute. To be cute, I could say, or glib is I think a better word. Perhaps nobody would ever accuse me at this point of being cute. But to be glib, I could talk about a declining global value structure. But I won't, because I don't think that's the right way to think about it. But what I am talking about is that the Western, Judeo-Christian, democratic, enlightened, rational value structure that has dominated the world, I would say, since the beginning of the colonial period, that has kind of dictated and established global norms, has the era for that value system is ending, and a new value system is emerging. And it's emerging with a much more Asian inflection, and I don't want to deal in stereotypes. I'm not an expert on this or frankly any other part of the world, but I do think that the Chinese and other parts of the world, sort of like South Asia, India is in here, that their value system is not as individualistic as the US and Western European value system was. Their concepts of capitalism are different. Their concepts of how to govern are different. And as you know, that part of the world, if you just count India and China together, has well over 2 billion people. And the part of the world that is declining dramatically for the most part in population is the West. And it's not clear to me how or even why Western values should continue to be the norm setting in the planet going forward. A lot of people I know who are, international relations, national security people, think this is a horrible catastrophe. I'm a little bit more neutral, as I said before, neutral about it. I think it's arrogant of us to assume that our value system is, going to endure forever. Obviously, systems are composed of the individual agents operating in the system, and quantity has a quality all its own. When other parts of the world other than Western Europe and the US have dominant economic and social power, then they're also going to have norm-setting powers. I would like to think that there's an opportunity for us to make this transition in a productive and not violent way, but I'm not confident about that. Another part of the world in fact, the only part of the world that will have a growing population in the next 30, 40 years is sub-Saharan Africa and some parts of South Asia. And so their values are probably going to be in the mix as well. Anyway, I think not in my lifetime probably, but perhaps in the lifetimes of some of the people listening to this, those few of you who are, the values that we've been just assuming are eternal values that we've had for the last 300 years, capitalism, the rights of the individual, those I think are going to be replaced by another set of values, and I won't be arrogant enough to speak about what those might be, but it will be a very interesting transition to be a part of. And then the final thing that I cited to this person I was talking to as the four most serious problems facing the planet in the US today is what I call the decline of meaning. I say that to people and they react in different ways. Some of them I think improve it by One of them I thought made a very useful comment, and they said it's not so much the decline of meaning, but the decline of knowing, or a crisis in how we know. And I think that's also a very good way to think about it. But what I originally mean by a decline of meaning is that all of these structures and boundaries that we had as humans that provided us with assurance that our life had a purpose and that there was a map and coordinates that we were to follow, and there was an arrow in our life, and there was a reason for our life. I think since World War II, those have been declining really rapidly. I would say that it was religion, work, and family structure that has, and community and tribe, that have provided humans with kind of an anchor effect in their lives. And I think religion in particular has declined. I think our sense of community has also declined, and I think family structures are changing, and relationships among humans, the dynamic of that is changing. And then, of course, work is very much changing and evolving. And for a lot of people, meaningful work that provides them a pension for their last 20 years has disappeared. And I think I don't have a lot of statistics I can cite on this, although there is an interesting article in The Atlantic recently talking about the decline of church going in the U.S. Something like 40 million people, Christians, have stopped going to church in the U.S. in the last 25 years. That's a huge number. And a number of people who cite no religious affiliation in all types of surveys and the census has increased dramatically. I think, and again, I can't prove this empirically, but I do think that this decline of meaning is contributing to acts of nihilistic violence, to the homeless problem particularly in capitalist societies. And I think it's very, very troublesome because there is no easy fix for this. It's kind of like once you lose the purpose of your life, it's usually pretty hard to regain it. And there aren't any empty words or easy policy fixes that'll make things better. Anyway, those were the 4 things that I thought were worth mentioning when someone asked me what are the problems facing the planet in the U.S. today. If you have some comments, I'd love to see them. And if you enjoyed this conversation and want to know when I'm going to post another conversation like this, do subscribe and like this video. In any case, until the next time, I'll talk to you later, and thanks for those who listened until the very end.